Hey everyone, it's Coach Robert with a trick for the king and pawn endgame. This is a pretty basic trick. I'd like to start out with something even more simple though, just as a reminder. So this is a square rule. This has been done time and time again. And in this example, it's basically a geometric case of a counting trick. With the counting tricks in the king and pawn endgame, it means we are going to try to replace our calculation where we visualize the whole sequence of moves with a tally of how many moves it takes for us to do our plan, and then we compare with how many moves it takes for them to do their defense against our plan or to push their own agenda. And we can decide if our plan is worth doing very quickly just by counting the moves. Of course, this is a little more sloppy because when the concrete details matter, we are going to sometimes run up against some problems. Anyway, so here's an example where we have a cut and dry counting issue. This is called square rule. The way you do the square rule is when you are thinking, hey, can I just run back and stop this pawn before it promotes? Instead of visualizing all the moves, you can just draw this square. And the way I like to do it, I like to draw a triangle first because that's easier for kids. But then when you draw two triangles, you have your square, right? So the way the square rule works is you draw a square that connects the pawn with the end of the board, and you just round it out to make a square. And if you are on the move and you can step into that square on your move, you are able to catch the pawn with your king. So what this rule tells you is that if they only push the pawn, they will not win. They need to get their king involved, and then you can start examining those things. So you see, this is a very quick way of applying a counting rule because this hinges on the fact that the pawn moves the same number of steps as the king. So in this case, our king gets in on f5 and the pawn doesn't promote. So this only works when it's one pawn and your king is trying to catch that one pawn. So let's try to extend the same logic to a more sophisticated case. So this is like halfway through a somewhat complicated king and pawn endgame puzzle. And I thought this was a good case for us to look at the counting. So first, maybe just pause the video and ask yourself, like, hey, what am I going for here? Because if you don't know what's going on in the position and why you want to start counting, it's a little bit silly to just start doing it. So let's figure out why we need to use a counting trick. So if you've paused and figured it out, you might have noticed that here, if we move our king, we lose our h-pawn. If we move our e-pawn, it's not clearly good for us because after they take it, we still can't do very much, and we can't move our queenside. So we're sort of forced into a race. Now, in that sense, we could just go for it because we don't really have anything else to do. But let's say we want to know, like, as we get into this position, are we going to win this race? The way you would go about doing that is you count up the moves that white wants to play. You imagine what they are, and you count them up. And then you count up what moves black wants to play. And we'll see whose plan is faster, okay? So for white, we might say their plan is king f5. And we're not going to do any arrows in real life. Obviously, on a real chessboard, if you start getting out arrows and laying them on the board, people are going to actually know that you're crazy. So don't do that. So after king f5, we want to play king f6. And notice that we're like skipping black's move here. For now, we're just thinking about our plan. So that's two moves, and 3, 4, 5, 6 to get a queen. And we're kind of supposing that if we get a queen, that's going to be really great. Counting makes a lot of sense here, since you can see that if black just tries to run back and get the pawn, we're going to push our h-pawn and win. So they're sort of forced into one line, and this is where the counting tricks really work. When there's just one line that's forced, instead of visualizing it, you can count a lot of the time. So this is white's plan, and it takes 6 moves. But as soon as we play king f5, they're going to play their own plan. King h5, and then g4, g3, g2, g1, and get a queen. And that takes 5 moves. So on the surface, it looks like white is actually losing the race and that we can reject this. However, there's an additional layer to this trick that if you can throw a check in there somewhere, it will often give you extra moves to execute your plan. So if you haven't already figured it out, you can pause the video and see where is white getting a check along the way and how does that help them. It's pretty clear that it has to be from the pawn promoting. The reason is that the king is on h5 still. in Black's basic plan, we didn't include any king moves except king h5. So when we finally get that queen, they will be in check, right? They didn't move anywhere. So that extra move is really useful, and it turns out that this is enough to win because it moves our tally of a 6-move plan down 1 move to a 5-move plan, and we're going first, right? So Black's plan was 5 moves, our plan was 5 moves, but we go first, and we win. So this is kind of like card counting in poker in the sense that we're like adjusting a tally of things. So after king f5, king h5, king f6, the pawns start running. And they got a queen first, but it doesn't really help. And here you can see that because the king's on the edge of the board, they're going to lose their queen on g1, which is an extra tactical bit. So this trick works pretty well when you're in a race where we're both promoting pawns. It helps you out because you can sort of skip that whole visualization part and just start imagining the end positions. And you can get an over-under on whether or not it's even worth it to start doing that. You do have to be careful, though. Even when you're applying the square rule, you need to be careful because sometimes there are pitfalls where you don't have a single forced line. You actually have options, and it can mess things up. So my recommendation for trying to use the counting tricks is that you should get yourself some king and pawn endgame puzzles and just start comparing. Like, try to do the visualization and the counting and see how they size up with each other. And I think you'll find a good balance of using the counting tricks and visualizing the exact position at the same time. So I hope you like this little trick, and feel free to check out my other content. Maybe I'll see you on a live stream. Take care.